Welcome to another 8th Wall Augmented Reality tutorial. In this video, we're going to show you how to bring your models, rigs, and animation data from Maya or really any other 3D program into Unity into an augmented reality app on your phone that you'll be creating with 8th Wall technology for free in just a few minutes. This technique is going to work with any 3D application that can output data to a game engine such as Unity. So whether you're using Maya, 3ds Max, or even Blender, you'll be able to bring your creations to life in augmented reality. Let's get started. So you can see here in Maya, we've got this cute little robot, and he shows up, comes to blink and wave and say hello to you before going back to his position where he loops and does it all over again. So I'll just pause him there, and you can see that as I play through, we've got all this animation data. All this robot is a bunch of simple shapes all parented together, all that to create a very basic rig that you can see all the keyframes down here. So we want to take all this geometry and all the animation data, move it into Unity, and go from there. So here's what we need to do. This model, since he's super basic, has no NURBS curves, no handles around to grab, so I'm just going to grab his root geometry, which is this cylinder 1, which I could rename, but that's all that is. I'm going to go to File, and if you're in a newer version of Maya, you actually have a File, Send to Unity selection here. But I'm going to go ahead and just do this the old-fashioned way by saying Export Selection. I could export all, but in this case, I just want this one asset, so I'm going to say Export Selection. The first thing we want to do is come to Files of Type and change this down to the very bottom to FBX Export. You'll see this changes the menu of settings over here. Now, Unity can import a whole bunch of different file types, but in this case, I'm going to show you how to do it with an FBX. I'll just put this on the desktop, but what's important here is that we check the settings to the right. If you have reference geometry and data, you might want to check these different menus here. There's a lot of stuff to verify, but for us in this case, I'm going to make sure to go to Include and check out our geometry, and you want to make sure here that there's nothing you're going to be missing that you don't have checked. So if you're worried about your tangents, or if you need to triangulate your mesh from here for any reason, if you're doing kind of game stuff and you don't want to worry about quads, or if you have NURB surfaces that need to be converted to something else, you can check all that here. In this case, I don't have to worry about that, so I'm going to make sure to go down to Animation. You have to make sure that this box is checked, or you're not going to be able to keep any of your animation data, as you can probably guess. Now, depending on what you're going to be doing in Unity, you may or may not want to bake the animation. In this case, it's not going to matter one way or the other what we do, but you do want to make sure that if you do bake the animation, you have the proper frame rate set to match whatever you're doing in your timeline. So if you have 500 frames of animation, make sure to say 500 frames here. So I'm at 225, so there's that. It's also important to know whether you have any blend shapes or skins that need to be carried over. Again, this is such a simple model, I don't have to worry about any of that. The last thing you want to go to is constraints. Constraints can be a little bit tricky when trying to export the data here, but the first step is to make sure that if you need them, you have them checked. I don't need them, so I'm going to continue without them. Basically, there's a lot going on the right here. I have to change very little for such a simple setup, but you may want to go through and do a little bit more research depending on if you have a really complex rig that you're dealing with. So just a quick refresher, if you don't see these things over here, you probably haven't changed your type of files to an FBX export, and if you're using a different package than Maya, you want to just make sure you find the equivalents to these settings. Anyways, I'm going to call this 8th Wall Robot. Now the next major thing is to jump into Unity to bring in the animation. Now what we have here is the 8th Wall Augmented Reality demo project that you'd recognize if you've been following along with our YouTube series so far. For anyone new to the channel, this will only take you 5 minutes to set up. It's very quick. All you need to do is go to 8thwall.com, where we've just launched our new website. Go up to Create Account in the top right corner. Once you've created your account, you can always watch our other videos to get an idea of how this all works, but all you'll need to do for this video is go to Downloads, grab the 8th Wall XR free download. It'll download super quick, so hit that button. And then if you want to grab the demo project we're using, you come down here to Download Zip File. You'll also see a link here to the free XR remote. I'll show you what that does in a little bit. But once you've downloaded the 8th Wall XR here, as well as the XR sample app and tutorial, you can open up the demo project, and this is what you'll see. Now the demo scene here is just to create a table with a TV, and on the TV you'll see whatever your camera sees on your phone. Now really all we've done in this project is we've opened the demo scene and we made sure to import the 8th Wall XR that you downloaded. And if you run into any issues here with all this stuff in Unity, we have another video that gives you a quick demo of how Unity works and how to use all of our tools within it using this exact demo project. Now all we need to do is take the 8th Wall Robot FBX file that we created out of your 3D program and drop that into your Assets window in Unity. If you click on that, you can see over here on the right all the settings that come in with the import, and there's very little we need to do here. You can check and make sure that the rig is being interpreted correctly, and if you hit the animation tab and go to the very bottom, you can hit this little play button to preview the animation and make sure it imported properly. So there he is, he's waving, all seems to be good. The animation came in correctly. Now since this animation is supposed to loop, and since we don't want it to just happen once and then never see it again, let's go ahead and say loop time. And if for any reason you want to loop a time different than what you actually exported, say you had a bigger frame range than you meant to, you can always clamp and change your keyframe range. Once you previewed it and hit loop time, you can hit apply. If you forget to do this, try to click elsewhere, it'll still ask you to apply those changes. Now all we need to do is drag the robot either into your scene directly or into your hierarchy on the left. I'll go ahead and drop him into the hierarchy so that he shows up at origin, because if I were to drop him into the scene, he could show up kind of far back in space, and I don't want that. So now all there is to do is let's go ahead and delete that table because we don't need it anymore. Now, if you were to just deploy this as it is, it would kind of work. You would see the robot in space, but it wouldn't actually be tracked into augmented reality. For that, we want to use some of the 8th wall XR scripts, and it's very quick to just drag and drop them on. So go down here to the assets menu, and if you wanted to be really clean about this, you could drag the robot and put him in the models, because technically that's where he belongs. We'll come down here to the XR section, and you'll see that there is a scripts folder. So we'll go ahead and double click into the scripts folder. I'll make this a little bit larger so we can read them all. And we have a whole video explaining what all these things do, but basically what you want to have is the XR surface control script, which is going to make sure that a certain asset that you set this to gets locked and tracked to a surface detected by the augmented reality software that we've developed. Now we could just stick this to the robot, but you'll notice one thing is that the robot actually doesn't have a shadow. As I move him around, you'll see that there's no shadow. So let's add one more thing. Come over here to the hierarchy section, right click and say 3D object. We are going to create a 3D plane. You'll see that show up here. Let's go ahead and put this down at ground level. So I'll come over here to where it says transform position, the Y value, set the Y value to 0. You'll now see that the robot has a shadow. One last thing is we don't want a big white plane sitting in our scene, breaking the immersion of the augmented reality. So what we're going to do is actually come down here to the bottom left where it says all materials, and it'll show you all the materials in the scene. We actually include for you XR transparent surface, which if you just drag that onto the plane, makes that plane transparent, but still renders the shadow on top. And if you have a really, really large asset, you may want to scale this up so that a much bigger object could still have a shadow be visible, because if I zoom out here, you can see that if I put the plane too close or too far to the edge, the shadow only renders where the plane is. So just be aware of how big your object is versus how big your plane is. So only a few steps left. First thing we want to do is make sure that if the ground plane or the plane got moved, this is your game board. This is all the objects should be attached to this where your shadows live, because this plane is what we want to lock onto a surface. So let's drag our asset onto plane, and it'll parent it down so that if you were to move the plane, it also moves any assets on the surface. And for this reason, it's the plane that you want to come back down here to the XR menu under scripts, and you want to grab this XR surface control that we talked about. You want to put that surface control onto the plane. So what you do is click the plane, navigate down here to the scripts menu, and click and drag the XR surface control onto the inspector for the plane. Now this plane is going to work with augmented reality and lock to any surfaces. A couple settings here that are very quick and easy to understand are deform to surface. If you don't have a perfectly flat ground, you may want to turn this on so that the shadows and the surface can match a little bit closer to what you have in the real world. This one feature only works on ARKit and ARCore enabled phones, but all the rest of these work on every phone. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry too much about it. Ground only will say that this can only go on the ground level, where if you have this off, it'll also go into tables or other flat surfaces, not at your feet. This is good enough for now. Now, one last thing to check is the actual shadow quality is not going to be very good without doing one last thing. So if you go up to Edit, Project Settings, Quality, you'll want to make sure that under the Shadows section, you may have different kinds of shadows here, but you want to make sure that you are on Very High Resolution and Close Fit. You may see a slight jump in the quality here, but that's going to give you much better shadow resolution. But it's not going to actually show up like this in your phone unless you come up to the top right corner here and change the default. You can see here that you've got some green check marks that are on different quality levels. You want to make sure that everything is set to fantastic quality by default. All you need to do for that is click these little arrows, fantastic, 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 and you guessed it, fantastic. Technically, you only have to do it for the one app that you're going to be previewing this on, but let's just do it for all of them just to be safe. The only other thing you might need to check is if you go to directional light, you can actually change the strength of the shadow if you don't want it to be quite so intense. Now, if you're just trying to put a model in there with no animation, you could run this and you'd be good. But if you're trying to show your animation, there's one last critical step to do before we hit play. You'll want to navigate to where you have your model. So I moved it into the model section. Here's the robot. This is the settings menu we saw from earlier. Now, it's very important to do one last thing because right now it's just going to sit there. He's not going to animate, even though we can see it in the bottom right corner here. We're going to need to create an animator controller, which is very simple. So if you right click in the assets menu, go to Create Animator Controller. You can name this whatever you like. I'm going to say Play Robot Animation. If you double click on this, it'll bring you to this node graph. Now, if you don't use Unity too often or this looks intimidating at all, don't worry. There's only one thing we have to do, and it's very simple. Come back down to where your robot was imported and click this little twirl out menu. You'll see it pull everything into your scene, from all the geometry to the textures that you've created in your 3D package. And if you scroll down, you should see Take 001, which you might recognize from the bottom right corner. It was also named Take 001. This is the animation data for your asset. So all you need to do is click and drag this into this animation area, and it becomes a node. Basically what this means is that in your app, when you enter this model being created and existing, it goes straight to this take 1, so it goes straight to this animation and it will play. Now, by default, it's only going to play once, so that's why we initially came into this robot animation and told it to loop. That way it loops take 001 and you keep seeing the animation play. Another thing to note is if you are translating or moving the position of your asset in the scene space, so if I start messing with this thing and I start scaling or rotating or doing anything different to this animation, it might mess up the curves that you had created in your 3D application unless you do one thing. We actually have animation layers here in Unity, and the base layer is where all this exists. If you click this little settings cog, you'll see some different settings, and the main one I want to show you is blending. It says so that anything you do in Unity will override whatever you've created here. We don't want that. We probably want to add it on top of your current animation curves. So if you're having any issues with position, scale, rotation, you might want to check this setting first. Now we've created this animation controller. That's all well and good, but actually it has no effect on this robot at the moment. It's not connected in any way. It's just its own thing. So all that's left to do is click on our asset out here in the hierarchy menu. And over on the right, you'll see the animator for the asset. It asks for a controller. Right now it's set to none. So if we click this little browse menu, it'll ask us to select a runtime animator, and you can see the animation controller that we've made is selectable. Double click that, and now this asset is set so that the controller is the thing you created that basically said play the animation and loop it. And now we should be ready to try this. For the fastest possible way to test this out on your phone, download the 8th Wall XR remote app. It's free and it'll download very quickly. All we need to do is click XR controller, make sure that the remote is enabled, and if we hit play, so you can see here that we are previewing our app live, and the robot is actually sitting on the table properly, but he's too big and he's going off the ground. So he's here, but he's going too far. So what we'll do is we'll come back to Unity. I'll jump back to my scene view. What's cool is you can actually see the camera moving as I move my phone, and the lighting conditions change on the robot. We have 3D lighting, so that's sweet. So what I actually do in real time is I can scale everything down, I can rotate him, and I can put him where he should be. So now you can see that he's just hanging out here by my mouse, chilling, having a good time. So again, the super quick recap of all of that is to basically bring in your asset, check the settings over here in animation, make sure you loop the time if you want it to be looping, drag it into your hierarchy, place it wherever you'd like it. If you want shadows, don't forget that you're going to need a 3D plane somewhere in the mix. You probably want to put it below your asset, verify that that's all working. Under favorites, you've got the materials section where you can take on the XR transparent surface shader, giving you transparent objects, but still retaining the shadows. The shadows quality is set under Edit, Project Settings, Quality, where you can make those changes and then set them as defaults. Under the directional light is where you can change the opacity of the shadows themselves. And if you're having any weird clipping issues with your camera once you're using your phone, make sure you check the main camera settings over here and change your clipping planes that if it's super close, maybe you want a closer distance to be able to render from your camera. From there, any assets you create, for example, the plane or the robot, probably need to be locked into augmented reality space, which is done using the XR scripts menu, XR surface controller. That will lock the plane into place. And you can even do the robot separately if you really wanted to, just like that. You've got a few settings here. We're not going to worry about them at the moment. And you also need to make sure that if you want to see the animation play, you go back to where your model is imported, twirl out that menu, and make sure you take this take 1, and you're going to need to click and drag it into a new runtime controller created by right-clicking. Going to create animation controller, naming it something, and going into it. And then this again is where you take your animation data, drop it in, and you set this as the default by going back to your asset that is in this scene view and setting the animator controller to your animation controller. And once you hit play, you can either hit the play button up here to run it to your phone, or if you don't have our app, which I highly recommend grabbing, you can always go to File, Build Settings, or just Build and Run, and you can do it all the old-fashioned way, which takes a lot longer, so I'd highly recommend just checking out our app. Anyways, we hope this video's been helpful, and we hope it helps you to make some really awesome stuff, bringing all of your creations into augmented reality on your phone by using 8th Wall technology. For more great content like this, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out some of the stuff we post on Instagram for some sneak peeks on upcoming content. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.